Serious Sam. Well, the Serious Sam franchise is frankly a series that for the longest time I've had kind of a love-hate relationship with. But after recently playing through all of the mainline entries in the Serious Sam series, I feel like my outlook and my opinion on these games is a lot more positive. And even though some of the games are very different, wildly different from one another, I can kind of appreciate each entry for what it is and what it does differently than the rest. So yeah, let's start off with talking about the first encounter. So in Serious Sam, the first encounter, this is where we first play as Sam Serious Stone, a guy who is sent back in time to defeat the big bad, which in these games is this entity called Mental. And he has these massive hordes of several different types of alien species that are attacking Earth. And in the first encounter, you're sent back in time to ancient Egypt. So you've got to run around ancient Egypt, completing all of these missions and whatnot, collecting all of these Ankhs. And this is the first game of the franchise where we're introduced to the gameplay, which basically just involves fighting massive hordes of monsters. Loads and loads of them, more than probably we had seen in any other first-person shooter up until that point. So 2001, first encounter comes out, and a lot of the weapons were kind of similar to the archetypes that we would see in Doom, for instance. So you've got your shotgun, your double-barrel shotgun, pistol, minigun. There's a laser gun, which is kind of like the plasma rifle in Doom. Then you've also got your rocket launcher, grenade launcher, which is different than Doom for sure. Yeah, I think that's all the weapons in the first. Oh, actually no. How can I forget the SBC cannon? This is probably one of the greatest weapons in the first-person shooter. You just line up a bunch of enemies, and one cannon will just wipe out a ton of them all at once, and it is just as awesome as it sounds. So yeah, in the first encounter, you fight these huge hordes of enemies across ancient Egypt. The footage that you're seeing in this video is from the HD remaster of the first encounter. Same goes for the second encounter when we get to that game. Yeah, it's just a really fun time. Although I will say this is probably, for me, one of the more irritating games in the series, just because, especially in levels like Karnak and Luxor, there are a lot of moments where the developers seem to think it was a good idea to place clear skeletons behind a lot of the corners in the levels. So you will take massive damage entering a room at times. But I would say, that you can kind of plan for once you start to expect it. But probably one of the more annoying aspects of the first encounter are the enemy spawns. Particularly, and I don't know if this is mostly on serious difficulty. Serious difficulty is what I played all of these games on my recent playthroughs. But whenever you pick up any health, ammo, armor item, seems like every time just about a bunch of enemies spawn in, or a couple of really tough enemies just spawn right on top of you, and that can definitely be very frustrating. It had me definitely reloading a lot of quick saves. So that can be irritating. Sometimes it's best to just avoid picking up any items, but oftentimes they'll put the item in a narrow corridor, so he'll just walk over it without thinking, and then, oh, here's a dozen clear skeletons right on top of you, which can be very frustrating. So that's definitely an aspect of the first encounter that I do not enjoy. But other than that, I mean, all in all, it's a pretty good time. Yeah, from there, Crow Team eventually released the second encounter, which is the next game in the series. And in the second encounter, so you are riding in a spaceship that you board at the end of the first encounter after the final boss of that game, and it ends up crashing in ancient Latin America. So there's this cool like Aztec / Mayan motif that's going on, and it's nice. I like the aesthetics of it. So there are a few levels in that kind of environment. They introduce some weapons which I feel make the gameplay a lot more enjoyable. So they introduce a flamethrower, which seems to make dealing with clears much easier in some situations, especially in enclosed environments. And then I would say most importantly is the sniper rifle. So with the sniper rifle, whereas in the first encounter you had to rely on your rocket launcher and the slow travel time of the rockets to hit reptiloids and arachnoids, which the developers seem to like to place on high perches in the environments. Now you can just use a sniper rifle and just get a couple of quick headshots, and that'll deal with most of those kind of enemies. And it's a lot better because you don't have to rely on that slow travel time of the rockets. Gives you a little more freedom to deal with the other enemies that are attacking you, so that you're not having to worry about those big, heavy sniping enemies in the distance. And of course, before I forget, the second encounter also added a chainsaw, which is pretty self-explanatory. Definitely makes dealing with marsh hoppers much easier though. And also the Serious Bomb, which is basically a get-out-of-jail-free card, which if you had one in your inventory, you went into a panic because you're surrounded by enemies and didn't think you could deal with all of them, just use that Serious Bomb and it wipes them all off the field. So, a couple of great additions there as well. But yeah, I think these are two great inclusions to the gameplay, and because of that, I think the second encounter is a little better than the first. At least that's my personal opinion. I know that some people seem to like the first encounter better. I know that Frame Raider, another Serious Sam YouTuber, he seems to prefer the first encounter, but I really like the second encounter. But anyway, after that whole Mayan and Aztec string of levels, you then go to ancient Mesopotamia, and then you go to medieval Europe after that. So there's definitely more variety in the environments in the second encounter as well, which I really appreciated. But all in all, second encounter, more of like an expansion pack, I guess you could consider it, to the first encounter. But these two games together, first and second encounter, great start to the series. Great games, though the first encounter has its frustrations. Still, these are both very fun, enjoyable first-person shooters that any fan of the genre should definitely give a shot at least once. But anyway, after the second encounter, Crow Team, the developers of the Serious Sam franchise, would then go on to release Serious Sam 2 in 2005. And Serious Sam 2 is a game that was definitely a little controversial, both at the time and then in the years following. So, and the reason why Serious Sam 2 was controversial was mostly because of the art style, and just the way that characters behaved. It was all just very cartoony. It took itself even less seriously than the first and second encounters, which were already kind of goofy games at times. Serious Sam 2 was a game that when I first played it a few years ago, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit because of the art style. I didn't really care for how enemies in some levels, they just kind of spawn all around you instead of from a couple of set locations. That kind of irritated me. But going back and playing it now, especially after the patch that they released for Serious Sam 2 in 2021, I believe, so very recently, they added dual wielding and unlimited sprinting to the game, which I think makes Serious Sam 2 a much better experience. I mean, it is a lot of fun to dual wield the various crazy weapons in Serious Sam 2. They even added, I know, at least one new weapon that was actually a scrapped concept from the first encounter. It's a weapon that also made its way into, I believe, the next encounter, Siberian Power Weapon, I think is what it was called. But anyway, it has a different name in Serious Sam 2, but they added that, which I really enjoyed. But yeah, it's got some really fantastic gameplay. You feel most of the time more like you're pushing through the hordes in Serious Sam 2 as opposed to just, holding down the left mouse button and walking backwards, which the first encounter especially could feel like a lot of the time. But yeah, Serious Sam 2 really is a great time. I would say don't let the art style put you off, because I actually grew to love the art style. There are a lot of different bright colors. There is a ton of environmental variety. I mean, that's something that definitely seemed to improve from the first to the second encounter, and then to Serious Sam 2. It was just more and more environmental variety, because in Serious Sam 2, you're traversing from planet to planet. So each planet has its own distinct theme. There's like a jungle setting. There's a world where everything is huge. You go to Planet Clear, the home of the Clear Skeletons. There's like a fantasy medieval planet. And then you go to Planet Sirius, and it's like this big, like, techno metropolis. And you just fight hordes and hordes of enemies, and they also added these pretty cool vehicle sections in Serious Sam 2. I actually really like how the vehicles control in this game, because you can jump, just like if you're just, playing as Sam out of a vehicle. No sprinting or dashing, though, which I think would have been a cool addition in the patch. But yeah, the vehicles are pretty fun. They like to throw a lot of heavy enemies at you when you're in the vehicles, and it feels really satisfying to cut through the hordes with these big, like, plasma weapons and whatnot that they have on the vehicles. So yeah, lots of good additions to Serious Sam 2. Like I said, very bright and colorful. The dual wielding post-patch was great. The unlimited sprinting is great. Especially because the movement speed was a little too slow, in my opinion, in the base Serious Sam 2 experience. But yeah, that was Serious Sam 2. And then in 2011, Pro Team would come out with Serious Sam 3 BFE, which, despite being called Serious Sam 3, is in fact not a sequel to Serious Sam 2. In fact, it was a prequel to the first encounter. So this is it's on Earth, not necessarily modern day, but in the future on Earth, in a more modern-looking Egypt. So it kind of has this, like, modern warfare, like Call of Duty-looking environments in the beginning of the game, and that was likely because Crow Team had scrapped a modern military shooter that they were working on, and likely used a lot of those assets and environments in Serious Sam 3. Because I haven't played a whole lot of modern military shooters, not really my thing, I wasn't too bothered by these beginning environments in Serious Sam 3. I thought it was a nice change. Definitely the art style, though, they were going for a more realistic, gritty art style, so very different than Serious Sam 2. I think this is where you'll see biggest difference is between Serious Sam 2 and the newer Sam games. But yeah, Serious Sam 3, they used a lot of photo scanning technology for the environments in the game. So a lot of the places in the levels are based on or are actual places that the developers went to in person and took photos of. But yeah, Serious Sam 3 is definitely another enjoyable game. It's just like Serious Sam 2. I really didn't like it the first time I played it back in the day. But going back to it now, especially after some of the inclusions that were made to Serious Sam 3, like giving the shotgun way more rounds, post-fusion build of Serious Sam 3, I think that really helped the gameplay a lot. They added reloading to Serious Sam 3, which was a bit of a controversial thing for a while, although going back and playing it now, I really don't mind it. I don't think it's that big of a deal. You really only need to reload a few different weapons in the game. And Serious Sam 3 most of the time doesn't really throw the high number of enemies that you would see in the first and second encounter in Serious Sam 2. There's definitely smaller hordes for most of the game, at least up until you get to the end. Toward the end game, it feels like a classic Serious Sam game. There are a lot of enemies being thrown at you, and you really have to be smart about which weapons you're using, and really managing your ammo, and looking out for secrets to find more ammo. Speaking of secrets, so one thing that I still think was kind of a weird design decision in Serious Sam 3 was they made the sniper rifle and the laser gun secret weapons, which to me doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because I feel like if they just had them as regular weapons in the game, they can get away with throwing more enemies at the player. I guess the same goes for reloading as well. If you don't have to reload the assault rifle, they probably could have gotten away with throwing more enemies at you. But, regardless, Serious Sam 3 is still a great time, and it is cool to find those weapons as secrets, because you then feel like you really have, a little bit of a leg up on the enemies, which is nice. But yeah, Serious Sam 3, going back to it, it is a great time. The environments look beautiful. Like I said, this game was released in 2011, and it still looks great to this day. I mean, almost photorealistic at times. Really beautiful game. Despite some of the brown and gray color schemes that you encounter earlier in the game. As the game goes on, it really is beautiful, and it's a lot of fun. I would highly recommend it. But yeah, several years later, in 2020, we would eventually get Serious Sam 4, and this is a game that was highly criticized on launch, mostly for performance issues, but there's also elements to the gameplay which are a little questionable. Like, they added a skill tree, which is, it's okay. It's not a bad skill tree, but you do have to work your way up to the ability where you can, for instance, reload and shoot your weapons while sprinting, which is something that, in my opinion, should have just been a base ability, because I think this would have greatly enhanced the gameplay from the very beginning of the game, instead of having to work your way up to having that very basic ability. Because, the sprinting is great. It's something that was added in Serious Sam 3 first. But I think it would have been a lot better if they just let you shoot and reload while sprinting, as opposed to how they actually did it. But there is a skill tree. You can upgrade your melee so that you can melee some of the bigger enemies in the game. I didn't really play this way. I was all about just getting that shooting and reloading while sprinting, and then being able to dual wield assault rifles, then dual-wielding heavy weapons like rocket launchers, miniguns, mixing and matching heavy weapons. Yeah, there are definitely some great additions to the formula in Serious Sam 4. And so to give some examples of these additions, you've also got the gadgets that were added to Serious Sam 4. So these come in various forms. You can send out a drone that adds a little extra firepower. You can use this time warp device that slows down time while you move at normal speed. There's a rage serum that you can take that allows you to move and shoot faster. And then replacing the Serious Bomb from the second encounter in Serious Sam 2, there's a portable crystallized black hole generator that you can throw out, and it sucks in all the enemies on the battlefield. You can also use a mini nuke launcher, which serves a similar purpose. But yeah, on top of that, they also added a few new weapons. There's a flaming rocket-propelled chainsaw launcher, which is pretty crazy. It can cut through multiple enemies with one projectile, and it basically outdoes the cannon in some instances. And then returning from Serious Sam 3, you have the Devastator, which is basically like an automatic shotgun that shoots explosive rounds. Like I said, this was added in Serious Sam 3, but I would argue it's even better in Serious Sam 4. And then there's also an auto shotgun that was added to the game. So yeah, lots of great additions with the skill tree, with the gadgets, and with these new weapons. And then on top of all of this new stuff, you also had alternate fire modes that were added to the game. For instance, there's a multi-rocket mode on the rocket launcher. They added these alt-fire modes, which are really cool. There is a death ray mode on the XL2 laser gun, which is fantastic and is extremely satisfying to use on massive hordes of enemies. In fact, Serious Sam 4 might throw the most enemies at you out of the entire franchise, except maybe Siberian Mayhem might take it up a notch, but we'll get to that. Serious Sam 4, it is a very fun game, a little frustrating in the early game before you unlock a bunch of those abilities in the skill tree. But yeah, I mean, being able to dual wield like minigun with the laser gun, and being able to dual wield the minigun and the rocket launcher, 2 rocket launchers, I mean, it's a lot of fun. And it definitely it ramps up the chaos and just the magnitude of the fights and the scale of the fights and the crazy things you can do, and that's something that I think should be continued through the Serious Sam franchise, is just making things bigger and bigger and crazier and crazier. And you can tell that's what they were trying to do with Serious Sam 4. But yeah, in this game, so you go to Rome, you spend a lot of time in Rome and other parts of Italy. You go to France, and then eventually Russia. And yeah, it's a really good time. You can just sprint and mow down massive armies that serve mental. And the gore effects are fantastic. The jibbing looks great. It is a really fun game. I think that it maybe has been over-criticized despite its issues. It definitely has some issues, as I have outlined, that do annoy me. But all in all, Serious Sam 4 is a pretty crazy game, and it's a lot of fun. And like the other games, I would highly recommend it. But anyway, after Serious Sam 4, we're kind of surprised by the release of Siberian Mayhem, which is kind of a standalone expansion for Serious Sam 4, which was developed by a team of modders, some Serious Sam fans called Time Lock Studio. And this, I'd say, is neck and neck with the second encounter, in my opinion, for best games in the Serious Sam franchise. Siberian Mayhem is, it basically, the pacing I feel is better than Serious Sam 4. The pacing meaning with the number of enemies you encounter at once, how quickly you acquire the weapons in the game, how quickly you acquire skills in the skill tree. I feel like the pacing was just done a lot better in Siberian Mayhem. I mean, granted, it is a shorter gaming experience, but I do feel like the pacing was greatly improved in Siberian Mayhem. The performance was a lot better in Serious Sam 4. That's something that I didn't really mention about Serious Sam 4, is that though the performance has been improved, it's still not great. But yeah, in Siberian Mayhem, I would say that the environments look better as well. There were some areas in Serious Sam 4 that looked kind of iffy, like, you know, the immediate surroundings looked pretty good in Serious Sam 4, but out past that, because the levels were so large, a lot of the trees and skyboxes looked, you know, a little crappy at times, I'm not gonna lie, but in Siberian Mayhem, I feel like they really fixed that. All of your surroundings just look gorgeous. It's a gorgeous game. The gameplay is you know, pretty much the same as Serious Sam 4 with some additions, like for instance, replacing the sniper rifle is this super powerful crossbow, which, like with the other heavy weapons, you can dual wield, which is great. And this thing, I mean, it can one-shot wearables, and you can just, you know, dual wield headshot some of the heavier enemies, and it just does crazy damage. It shoots like what appear to be these electric bolts, and it's just an insane weapon. But it is definitely topped by the burner ray gun, and this thing is crazy. It just annihilates enemies. It literally just burns right through them. It looks like it's melting them as it passes through just these massive mobs, and it is just a crazy weapon. It's incredible. It's probably one of my favorite first-person shooter weapons of all time. I mean, it's crazy. And I hope that as the Serious Sam franchise continues, they add more ridiculous weapons like this burner ray gun, because it is one of the best parts of Siberian Mayhem. But yeah, Siberian Mayhem is awesome. I love this game so much. But yeah, that was my look at the Serious Sam franchise. So a lot of games that for a while I've had a love-hate relationship with. But going back and playing through the whole series, I can appreciate each game for what it is, and I can appreciate the strengths of each entry in the franchise. Particularly with Serious Sam 2 and Serious Sam 3, these are games that I didn't really care for at all the first time I played them, and now I love them. I can see myself returning to these games in the future. So yeah, Serious Sam, you should play these games. They're fantastic. They're hardcore. They'll put some hair on your chest. They're a great time. So yeah, that's all I got for today. So later.